Hi, everyone. Simone here. And today we are going to kind of dive into an introduction to universal design for learning. And our objectives for today are to explain the basic principles of universal design for learning, also known as UDL. So I'll be using those terms interchangeably as we talk. We're going to explain the relationship between UDL and accessibility as this applies to online courses. And we're going to identify several strategies for implementing UDL in the design of your courses through this brief introduction of the fairly involved and in-depth teaching and learning framework known as Universal Design for Learning. So we've met before, I believe. I'm Simone Christian. I'm the instructional designer in the School of Nursing, and my background is in multimedia design and corporate communications. So when I look at designing courses that'll work in our learning management system, I look at it very much through the lens of someone who is designing an effective website. And a lot of these strategies do apply to our learning management system. So I'm also an educator and a technology trainer. If you've got questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, definitely reach out to me at schristian@ndm.edu. So universal design, that term was actually coined by Ronald Mace, who's an architect, who was an architect and a product designer and an educator and a consultant. He was also someone with a physical disability. And he coined the term for his work in advocating for people with disabilities. So universal design actually refers to the physical environment, and it's also called design for access. So when you're looking at, let's say, this set of stairs, for example, we can see that something like steps getting from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top can be an access feature. And with this particular design, you have the ability to accommodate people with no mobility issues, to accommodate people who are elderly and may have difficulty taking a lot of steps, people who are pushing strollers or carts. So universal design is really about providing access to as many people as possible. And that's what I want to think about as we go through. So we have seen universal design in a lot of our life. I mean, honestly, from the 80s through today. So can you think of any universal design solutions that you've seen either on our campus or other campuses or other areas in life? Something that comes to mind immediately, especially since I have this picture up, is the modular seating in classrooms, as opposed to those immovable desk and chair units. So people who are coming into the classroom in wheelchairs, for example, are able to fit into the space, and chairs and desks can be moved around. But we also have, like in our restrooms, we've got those taps that you touch, and the water runs for a certain amount of time and it shuts off automatically. So if people have dexterity issues, they don't have to twist and turn knobs and faucets. So those are a couple access related universal design options. So in looking at implementing any of the UDL strategies that we're going to talk about, you want to remember to be proactive and design and create a learning experience that supports all students, or as many students as possible. You want to plan and organize courses to support learning for the diversity of students that we have in our classrooms, and you want to create flexible learning environments that can support learning differences and learning preferences of the students that come into our classes. So let's look at the students that come into our classrooms. besides questions of ability and disability, our students are coming into the classroom with a lot of differences. It could be in their language skills, their ages, the culture that they're bringing with them, their ability to attend the classes, their personal and professional interests, their communication skills. They're coming in with different levels of family support, and they're coming in different genders. So these are all things that we think about when we talk about universal design for learning, because providing high quality education is a matter of social justice as well. And UDL is an innovative framework that supports all learners, regardless of socioeconomic, gender, language, cognitive, physical, and emotional backgrounds. And this is actually really delved into in the UDL on campus website, and I will share the links for Universal Design online. So let's talk about some beliefs that that I've actually heard from educators in the past. And you know, I've heard this from 7 years back when I first learned of universal design to today, when it comes to accommodating learners in the class. People have said, you know, the average student will do just fine in my class. And this average student, this air quotes average student, doesn't actually exist. Courses shouldn't be designed as one size fits all, because it doesn't work for everyone. We should have courses that are meant to be a bit more flexible, that can meet people's needs in teaching and learning. And, you know, when I say one size fits all, like that doesn't work in clothing, it doesn't work in healthcare, medical care, mental health care. And so looking at it, we don't really want to try and shoehorn everyone into the same mold in teaching and learning. Now, another belief that I've heard, another thing I've heard from educators is I've never actually had a student in my class who was visually impaired. And when you're thinking about designing for the majority of learners, yes, visual impairment, visual ability does come into play. In adults ages 18 to 64, these are American adults, just everybody, not just in school, 27% have visual difficulty or impairment. 26% have dexterity difficulty or impairment. 21% have hearing issues, questions, or impairments. 20% have cognitive, and 4% have some sort of speech difficulty or an impairment. And you know, and when you look at that idea of the average quote unquote student coming into the classroom, you know, people are normally thinking about this bottom part of this pyramid where 21% have no difficulties, but the bulk of individuals fit into the middle, mild to moderate difficulties range. And at the very top is where you see the need for intervention for accommodations. So if we can design our courses and learning experiences for the majority of individuals in our courses versus just that 21% on the bottom there, we will still be able to address the needs of most of the pyramid, and the accommodations will be covered. So I found this wonderful statistic from the National Center for Education Stats. And it says 19% of all undergraduate students have some form of disability. This is in the United States. And you can drill down into these statistics because it's really interesting to look at. 28% of First Nations and Alaska Natives have some form of disability coming into the university setting, 21% of white students, and 17% of Black students. And also, according to a recent study in 2019, 9% of students who identify as having a disability didn't even tell their institution didn't alert their institution of that fact. So when we build our courses with some of the UDL concepts in mind, we'll have met the needs of more and more of our students. So why do I tell you all this? It's really to illustrate the point that we have to change our thinking just a bit. We tend to want to move away from things that might be a bit more difficult or add more work onto our plates. And we maybe even believe that another department on campus is responsible for these changes. But we actually need to expand our bubble of knowledge and our bubble of responsibility and make some real changes in our practice. And by creating course materials and activities and assessments that can reach more of our learners in the classroom, we'll be more effective educators. So let's actually just take a look at what these UDL guidelines look like. And this is from the cast.org website, which is where I got the majority of this content. And this actually probably looks a bit daunting, this grid here, because the framework is actually a really big and comprehensive framework. So the guidelines are set up to develop learners who are purposeful and motivated, who are resourceful and knowledgeable, and who are strategic and goal-directed. And we do this by offering multiple means of engagement, that's our green column here, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of expression. So what does that mean? You know, this looks actually fairly overwhelming, but I've kind of simplified it for you here with my own little grid. We're designing inclusive learning environments, not just for online, okay? It's also for face-to-face, for hybrid, for high flex, for this remote learning that we're doing, not just online, but that's also included. So in this first column, we have the what, and that is multiple means of representation. So it's presenting information in different ways, basically. The how, the second column, is to allow for different ways to organize information. And the why, and that's multiple means of engagement, is to allow for a variety of ways to challenge and motivate our learners. So before we kind of dig into each one, I want to talk about the relationship between digital accessibility and universal design for learning. I've heard them discussed as they're the same thing, but they're not precisely the same. So for digital accessibility, the guidelines are something that we must do to meet the needs of a subset of learners that have specifically identified needs. And this is a legal mandate. We have to do this, and this is all meant to be done before our students step foot into our classrooms. So things like when we offer video or audio for our students, the videos need to be captioned. We need to provide them with at least captions, but also transcripts of what's happening in the video. For using websites and web content in our learning, we have to make sure that the images are captioned, that there's alternate text in the body of the website. We have to meet color contrast standards and not have light gray or light blue text, because that may not be visible to people who have color blindness. And you know what, color blindness is one of those disabilities that students don't necessarily report, but that is one that's covered under accessibility standards. What else do we have here? The websites that we use need to be regularly audited so that 404 errors on websites don't pop up when they're used in our teaching and learning. And there are other accessibility standards, and again, a legal mandate, and this stuff has to be done. Now, in the UDL framework, Universal Design for Learners, this is a very big framework, and it's something desirable that we want to do if we want to truly support our learners. So you can see where accessibility is part of the UDL framework, because under providing options for perception in UDL, and that is the what, that means that we do have alternate text. We do have image tags on websites and digital documents. We provide transcripts and captions to audio and multimedia, and we're using the heading styles in our digital and web documents. And so this is what it looks like. This is where it is in my simplified version of the framework. It is the what of UDL, providing options for perception. So consider this, and we'll kind of roll them all together: accommodations, accessibility, and universal design. Let's say you have 60 students in your classes. Maybe you're teaching 3 or 4 sections of a course. Perhaps you have 7 learners, 6 or 7 learners, who have come in with a documented need for accommodation. But remember from the stats earlier, there could be up to 9% of disabled students who haven't alerted the school to their disability, and many more who come into the classroom with visual, dexterity, age, family support, cognitive issues, a variety of learning preferences, all of these different that you don't necessarily see, you're not informed in writing about. So this kind of illustrates the difference between accessibility, accommodation, and universal design for learning. So as we go through and discuss the practical applications for UDL, I'd like you to reflect on what you're currently doing and how you might plan to do more, because you don't have to implement everything, and there's no time, but you can make some small changes, and those small changes can make a very big difference to the learners you encounter in class. So let's take a look at these practical applications. Some key things to consider, and these are actually just 3, is to look at your various assignments, activities, assessments, and ask yourself, what is the objective? What is being measured by completion of this assignment, activity, or assessment? Once you can nail down the outcome, once you nail down that outcome, then you can start to envision the various routes that learners may take to reach that desired outcome, because there's no one way to get to any objective. And so you can start to kind of build in, perhaps there are different ways or multiple ways that people can do this, and I want to allow them the opportunity to choose and get to that objective. As long as they meet it, that's what I'm here for. Now, once we kind of grasp that, we can begin to open up options for our learners. And the last thing is that you want to figure out what the barriers to learning or the barriers to completion are, what roadblocks exist that may impede our students. So if we can identify these, we can start to remove them, or we can reduce them for our learners. So just as an example, I was helping an instructor, this is a few years back, revamp the discussions in a writing course, the discussion boards that students complete. And in this writing course, we had a discussion prompt for students to list and discuss the research sources for an upcoming paper. Now, the objective for this activity was for learners to apply research methods by selecting and evaluating a series of appropriate print and online resources. So the writing prompt also bears this out, so that was well stated. But in looking at the basic instructions for the discussion prompt, I had to ask, do students actually need to write a post in technical writing? It was APA style or another written style. Do they need to write that to complete the objective? Because mastery of the writing style wasn't a stated objective for this. And at this point in the research process, it's not actually even relevant to their mastery of selecting and evaluating credible sources. So my suggestion, as far as like figuring out the routes to achieving the objective, my suggestion was that perhaps students can share their findings in writing, of course, in those 2 paragraphs, or they can create a video or upload an audio file, or they could even create a slideshow, something in PowerPoint that kind of talks the audience through what they found and what their process was. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be 2 paragraphs with at least 5 sentences per paragraph. So we were able to identify those different routes to achieve the activity objective. And I would say for barriers to achieving that objective was actually in the original wording of the writing prompt, where students were asked to apply a particular format, writing style format, to this fairly informal discussion. And this was happening in a course where they would have ample opportunity to practice and apply the specific format rules. So we were able to kind of pare this down and also turn it into something that that offered students some choice in the way that they answered the objective. So now we are talking about the why of UDL. This fundamental has to do with engagement. It's the first of those 3 buckets in UDL. So I want you to think about how you engage learners to actively participate in classes. Active participation is key when we want to consider how we make it possible for students to engage and reap those full benefits of strengthened learning, of more robust encoding and recall of the course content, really make the most of our instruction. So it's a good idea, and these are all, I have a few slides of different ways to do this. So you can include assignments with real world application, such as case studies. Students can examine case studies and come up with their solutions for different issues. And in a pathophysiology course that we have, our faculty looks at case studies that are relevant to the nursing students' work environment. So I think from the outset of the course, they have maybe 10 or 12 various case study options. So each class looks a little bit different from semester to semester based on the work that the students are doing, and the case studies are all kind of relevant in to pathophysiology. So next up, if we explain where our course concepts are used in the real world, in real life, in the workplace, or in community, and this actually appeals to the individual learner's interests or professional ambition. And next up, we provide learning experience that allow active participation and exploration. So we use discussions. We have various discussion types like round robins, or we have team debate, and we, even use Socratic seminar and fishbowl discussions, case study discussions, small group share, but allow students the opportunity to kind of have their say and debate and speak to others and learn from each other in addition to learning from you. Offering a both individual and group assignments is how you can mix it up a bit and challenge and motivate learners. And I know in a lot of courses, when we have group assignments, students are given a long-term high-stakes assignment or a project, but why not have it be for smaller scale activities? I mentioned earlier working with case studies, but break them up into groups and have them examine and come to their various solutions for different case studies as groups. And that can be incredibly engaging for learners because it's not that high stakes. Oh, Jenny's not pulling her weight, or Bobby didn't complete, the spreadsheet on time. So that's one. You can allow for a choice of topics and assignments based on interest or based on personal relevance. And some students, even those who are motivated to do well in your class, they're motivated by grades, will put a greater effort in if they find a topic that speaks to their own academic or personal interests. Now, in discussions, rather than using that usual post once, reply twice, have you ever opted to post first and have your students respond to you and ask questions of you? You can also use video notes and encourage learners to respond to prompts in a video. And I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is my discussion board, and it's just the course introduction. Let's introduce ourselves. And I've given my learners the option to write 1 or 2 paragraphs or use a video note that is a minute to a minute and a half long. And there's a little video that shows them how to do it. And here are the questions for this prompt. If I scroll down a little bit, I have a learner here who has responded to the video note. I'll play a little of that.
Hi, my name is Natalie Van Horn, and I am the enrollment manager for the School of Nursing here at Notre Dame of Maryland University.
And these are
So I
captioned, by the
recruit
way.
our undergraduate adult nurses in the RN to BSN and our graduate nursing students in the MSN program. I would rate my writing skills at about an 8 or 9, depending on the topic, whether it's research-based or reflection-based.
Et cetera, et cetera. So you have some really good options if you are interested in kind of mixing up your discussions. Another way to get to that why and providing those options is to explain the connections between activities, objectives, and materials in the course. And showing a sequence is useful. You can kind of tell them about it at the start of the course, and you'll give them an idea of how all of these things fit together. This can be reinforced fairly easily by repeating a format or a layout of that first module through all of the subsequent modules in the learning management system, or using the same format in various sections as you go through them in the classroom. So in our LMS, there's some more things that are built in. We have self-checks. You can have quizzes and self-assessments or ungraded quizzes that give learners immediate feedback. You can also provide them with multiple communication channels. A good idea that I've seen happening, especially with our current COVID sitch, is that educators are allowing students to do a quick check-in at the start of class. So maybe it is a 5-minute round robin, tell me something good that happened this week, or tell me something that challenged you in our assignment, keep it short. But doing that check-in in class so they're able to communicate in that 5-minute span of time. Having virtual student hours, having face-to-face student hours also is a useful way to open up communication channels for learners. And some will make use of this. The majority of students will end up sending you an email when they run into roadblocks, rather than pop into a virtual meeting. But having that available sends a message to your learners that you are open to communications, and it does help them feel more connected in the classroom. I've seen it. And the last one here is to give prompt and instructive feedback on assignments, activities. Like if we are in a fully online setting, you're taking a fully online class as a learner, and you are submitting assignments, assessments, activities, and receiving no feedback, regardless of the grade, you have no real idea of what may be the highs or lows of the assignments that you're submitting. So that is one way to help students engage. So I gotta ask you this, and I hope that you're able to write down, which of the why ideas can you incorporate into your teaching and learning, into your classes? So now we're talking about what. The fundamental idea of what in UDL is this. Students access information in a variety of formats, including auditory, visual, possibly even tactile ways. It's a good idea for you to vary how you express essential course content and information to increase the likelihood of information access and comprehension. And it'll also increase the effectiveness of your teaching. So As a family member, this might be the most daunting idea, presenting a variety of content types, but you'll see that, it's not all that bad. And when you present information in a variety of ways, you might use your syllabus to provide an overview of course assignments. Uh, and obviously information of the course. You can use your lecture outline. You can use that to focus each session. You can use active learning exercises to review key points of the lecture. You can add video explanations of key assignments or concepts, and also provide detailed instructions with grading rubrics and completed exemplars of the assignment. So excellent work. Show them what it looks like. And so these are different ways that you can present content information. You can offer choice in readings for your learners. A good thing to do, I think, is supplementing lecture and reading assignments with visual aids. In one class that I worked on, a psychology class, the professor offered readings and uploaded the lecture PowerPoints without notes so students could take notes on them, and also offered a weekly video critique where learners then had to watch a video and then analyze the video. And it was short videos, TED Talks that were 10 or 15 minutes long, and analyze the video. And the videos were relevant to the week's readings. And sometimes that just helped to reinforce the learning or make the learning from the textbook more clear. Giving your students checklists for multi-step processes. That is actually not a bad idea when you are doing those long-term high-stakes projects and students are responsible for completing it bit by bit or part by part until you get to the end of the course. Hey guys, we're in week 4 of the course. Here's the checklist and see how far you've gotten. You can return to the checklist later or what have you. I've seen in actually a lot of my my science classes, like the use of mnemonic devices to support recall and kind of exploring the idea of students creating their own mnemonic devices for recall. Providing information in multiple formats. So lecture, obviously, in text, like using the textbook, sorry. Using the textbook or articles that are relevant. In graphics, so presenting your learners with infographics that maybe illustrate how medical issues affect certain demographics is always useful. Audio podcasts, some of our instructors are using those to supplement information in the course, and of course, video. And I haven't seen this used a lot, but I think it's not a bad idea. Fill in the blank note-taking. So offering the students the opportunity to have the notes prepared or have the notes ahead of them, offering students the opportunity to have the notes in front of them. And as lecture is going on, or as they are working on readings or working on video, then they have to connect the dots by filling in certain parts of the notes. Kind of useful. Now, in our LMS, we can use this to kind of push forward that what. You can provide all course documents in the LMS so that the students can access them when needed. And this is something I've always been a proponent of because learners study in different ways. And rather than having, just the listing of the textbook reading if you're in a face-to-face class, like provide them with everything. Students, you don't know when they will go back to things and revisit certain items in the class, but if they're available to them, then you have that option and that they can go back on their own. Using the checklist tool, and I mentioned that in the slide above, but using that checklist tool to help them stay on track. I'll get back to speech to text and text to speech in just a minute because I want to show you what that checklist tool looks like. And if I go into my class and I'm just going to view it as a student, sorry, my computer's a little bit slow today. I will view as a learner. And when I get back into my content, in my table of contents, you'll see that I have created a checklist. And this is actually in that first introductory module. My checklist is basically, are you prepared to move on? So have you gone through the course syllabus? Did you do let's introduce ourselves? Did you do all of this other stuff? And it is right here. Course preparation checklist. And this actually is a great way to not only tell them, you know, these are the things that you're expected to do, but also remind them of some certain processes that they might have overlooked. So, yep, I've read the syllabus, I've got textbooks, I did that, I've read the handbook, and I've reviewed disability support services and understand if I need accommodations. I've done that as well. And the checklist in Brightspace automatically saves, so your students can then just move on to the next thing or move on to the next thing as they see fit. Now, speech to text and text to speech, I think, is something that is useful for our learners. And we don't have screen readers built into our version of Brightspace, but we do have something called the Microsoft Immersive Reader that is built into our Office 365 and our web-based Outlook. So if you have documents for your learners to read, you can if you have long documents, many chapters and so on, you can actually have them open up the file in Word in Office 365, and the immersive reader is actually built in there. I suppose I could show that to you. If I go into my Outlook, which isn't open. And I'll just go into Microsoft Word here. Okay, so I've opened up a fairly long document. It's got images and text and figures and appendices and so on. It's got everything built in, but in Microsoft Word, if I come into View, then I can open up the immersive reader on these Word documents, and it should read this for me fairly easily. So this is the immersive reader, and when I hit play.
Research methods. Have you ever wondered whether the violence you see on television affects your behavior? Are you more likely to behave aggressively in real life after watching people behave violently in dramatic situations on the screen?
Okay, so text to speech is available through our Microsoft Office integration. Speech to text, we have that auto captioning and auto captioning that exists in our YouTube channels, and also tools like the video notes in Brightspace, and also in Zoom, which attempts to auto caption as well. So we have these things that kind of exist, and we can cobble them together to make things work. So when we talk about that, what I mentioned earlier, that accessibility piece, and we want you to provide, actually the government wants you to provide accessible materials when you're giving students digital materials, anything that they have to be able to access online. Our learning management system does a really good job of providing things like styles and heading structures in the templates that are built in, providing transcripts and captions. So if you're giving learners video or audio. Transcripts of what is said is one way to give that to them, or automatic captions that they can turn on or turn off. And that's done a lot of the time with, anyway, in the School of Nursing, is the YouTube auto captioning. Adding alternate text and descriptions for images. So again, in our learning management system, whenever you add an image, you are asked, what is the alternate text that you want to put here? Creating accessible tables. And that is done if you're using a table in Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, then you will be able to create table headings and create cell descriptions and a full description of the table, and that needs to be done. There are accessibility checkers built into all of the Microsoft Office tools and built into your PDFs. So learning to use those, I think, is really useful. And this is the part that of accessibility, or the part of UDL that is already a legal mandate. So I want you to think about any of those what ideas that you could incorporate into your courses, your course content, your coursework for your learners. And I am going to move on to the how, that how bucket of universal design for learning. And the fundamental idea here is to allow different ways of organizing, planning, performing, and expressing. So this allows you to provide options for physical action, options for expression and communication, and options for executive function. So what ways do you provide options for students to demonstrate what they know? In our learning management system, you can provide variety and choice in assessments and evaluation methods, including varying your question types in quizzes, using case studies for assessments, giving students oral presentations for assessments. You can provide choice in assignments. So do you have your students do projects or do group work? Do you have them do a poster presentation? Do they create a video? Do they create an infographic? How do you want them to show what they know? Another thing that I think is important is that you provide user control for audio and video. And so this means, and I will say this, my caveat is that in 2021, this is becoming less and less prevalent than it was in 2016. But when you give them videos or audio for them to view or listen to, you want to make sure that when they click on something, the video player doesn't just turn on and play all the way through. Allow them the option to control that video. Maybe they need to pause or rewind, or even like speed things up to twice the speed so that they can listen to it just a little bit faster than it's presented. And that actually is built into most of the video players. But if you find content where your students cannot control it, you're doing them a bit of a disservice. Another strategy here is to increase the number of low stakes assignments that build up to or scaffold to what your goal is. So instead of having one or two big exams and a midterm in the middle, you can have other assignments that they have graded that they are able to show their knowledge instead of just these few major grades. In our learning management systems, you can use the available tools for organizing content. So the checklist, the calendar can help learners to organize their assignments. User progress bars are built in so students can see how far they've gotten in module 1, 2, and 3. Rubrics are our friends. and file descriptions on our upload. So when you drag and drop something into the learning management system, add a description and tell them, hey, this is item X, tell them what it is. Now, the calendar, I mentioned using the tools for organizing. The calendar has reminders built in that are sent via email directly to learners, and it helps to keep them on track. Now, you can use the available tools to facilitate class communication and participation. We mentioned the discussion boards that allow learners for reflection and introspection, but we also have polls, and they allow participation, well, polls and surveys, they allow participation without singling anyone out. So figure out which tools best suit your needs and make them work for you. I wouldn't suggest using every single thing that's in Brightspace. You want to find out what works and then use it consistently. So those are the how for organizing and showing, having learners show what they know. Are there any of the ideas here that you can use in your teaching and learning? So I'm going to wrap up a little bit. And I want you to think about, as you integrate new ideas into your practice, you want to explore and you want to fine tune your approach. Ask your learners for feedback. Was the goal of the activity clear and meaningful? And that's the why. Were there barriers for you to access the information or the materials? Now it's kind of the what. And when you get to the how, were there options for you to show what you know? And I think that this is a very important one, because we do have some courses, and I've taken some courses where my assessments have not been great, and it's like, there are 50 multiple choice questions, but when we look at the actual learning and being able to apply the concepts, rather than verbal trickery and trying to figure out which answer is wrong or right, like being able to examine and apply some of the contents in coursework, I think were things that I had mastered as a learner, but the multiple choice questions weren't exactly getting me there grade wise. So today, what did we talk about? We went through the basics of the Universal Design for Learning framework, and it's a framework that helps us design inclusive learning environments. These guidelines help us to think about why, about what, help us think about how, and it does require intentional decisions, like, why is that arrow there? When we design our courses, and it allows for flexibility and choice to meet the needs of our learners. So I know you're muted, but in a word or two, is there a major challenge for you to do more with Universal Design for Learning in your courses? And I have heard this, I would say in the last 7 years, I've heard this almost each time I've done a presentation on it, but the time that it takes to build or to examine and dissect and then rebuild assessments and activities, that can be really time consuming. The time is a really huge factor. And my answer to this would be that it can be a barrier for some learners because it does seem overwhelming, but you don't need to start with every aspect of UDL. So perhaps you work only on the discussion activities in your course, or even one discussion, and reformulate your discussion prompt, have your students go through it, even tell them, this discussion is different from the rest, and tell them beforehand, and have your students go through and complete the discussion board and the discussion prompts, and then solicit feedback from your learners about it. Rubrics, designing those rubrics in the learning management system helps to save a bit more time in assessing the student submissions. So I would say that using the rubrics, and even, you know, as you change one thing, change the rubric that goes along with it, get the feedback from learners and see if that activity was something that was useful and meaningful for them, allowed them to show what they know, and you know, start small. That was the long answer. My short answer is start small with this. So for next steps, I've done a lot of talking, and I'm just wrapping up now. But the next steps for UDL, I think, would be to commit to continued growth. Once you have done one thing, you may feel empowered to do something else, or to work on updating the rest of the discussions, and perhaps the assessments might look a little different and you're just doing them one at a time. But commit to continued growth. Identify your UDL and accessibility practices. Like, what is it that I'm doing? And be very intentional about this. Again, I said to start small, and I mean it. Prioritize. All right, well, what can I do now? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that next, but I'm going to do this, test it out, get the feedback, and then I'll move on to doing this next. So prioritize. Use the learning management system and use the accessibility tools that are built in there. I would say also seek out training and resources. There's a lot of stuff online. And there are people like our new instructional designer. She's here to help everyone. The last thing in next steps is to support your colleagues. Learn what they're doing. Share your ideas and your resources. Share what works for you. This may come in the form of unsolicited advice, but it might come in the form of solicited, and people will want to know, oh, well, you're doing this. How is this working out for you? What are you using? That, I think, word of mouth, rather than reading a website and kind of going it alone, word of mouth from your peers and colleagues can be one of the most useful ways to work in universal design for learning. So if you've got questions for me about this basic introduction, let me know, reach out. And if you want to learn more about the entire Universal Design for Learning framework, it's cast.org is the website. So thank you so much. You guys have been fabulous. I'm going to take your questions now, and I'm also going to stop this video.